Well, I'm the best corner in the game.
What a run! Marshawn Lynch, get off me!
DK. Hey, it's John Schneider with Seattle Seahawks.
That's the result you're going to get. Don't you ever talk about me.
Fighting! He's still moving! He's gonna go! Down to the 20, the 15, they're chasing him 10! He's rolls his right, down the middle! Tyler Lockett, he's got it in the middle of the field! He gets the block! 25, 20, 15, 10, 5! How in the world did they do that?
This offense, just in general. I mean, you add
To
a
me,
guy
just
like
watching
that.
his film, he seems more of a back.
Just the
that-
presence he's got in that pocket, the way he throws the football. Rust days, man. All the scrutiny that line was under.
This Monday night's big.
Guys, welcome back to the Hawk Zone Rundown, episode 18. Man, we're flying through these, man. But we got an exciting episode today. We got Chris Cluff coming on the show. He's coming back on the show, actually. It's his second go around. B. Rice had an opportunity to chop it up with him the first time around, and really, really good content from well, both you guys. But yeah, it was awesome, man. Chris, former writer for the Seattle Times, still a sports journalist today, and we'll get into his stuff when he comes on the show. But just before that, man, let's kick off some NFL news.
So Mike McCarthy kept his job, which I think a lot of people were kind of worried about. And just following Seahawks Twitter along, everyone was terrified that because John Schneider mentioned him like 4 times in his press conference that if he gets fired, is he going to be the new coach of Seattle? I never thought there was any credence to it. It was John was just mentioning that was his one big coaching hire that he's ever had. And coaching search was when he was in Green Bay and they went and got Mike out of San Francisco. But like when you and me were talking about it the other day, like who takes that Dallas job?
Yeah.
If you fire Mike McCarthy and Dan Quinn leaves and gets a job somewhere, who takes that job? Who wants to deal with Jerry Jones? It's the same issue that, like I said, the Raiders and Al Davis had for years. While Al Davis was still, around, rest in peace, but it was you couldn't find good coaches to go there because they just couldn't handle him.
Were you surprised McCarthy took that job to begin with?
No, because I didn't think McCarthy was going to get back in the league if he didn't.
Right.
That was the whole thing. Like,
that's where you're at. Yeah. When you're
like
taking the
that.
Dallas job.
He kind of had no choice because I look at it in the sense he had basically failed with a Hall of Fame quarterback in Aaron Rodgers in Green Bay. If you're going to go back into the league, there was only a couple teams that, and like literally the Raiders were on that list for me at the time. Like, oh, do they bring in Mike McCarthy because he's established? But yeah, it's going to be interesting to see what happens in that whole Dallas situation now because, like you and me were talking earlier, what do you do with Dak? Do you pay Dak? Do you pay Dak a bunch of money? Like, is he worth that money? Like, I'd give Dak a little bit more, but I'd structure it in somehow the way that the Seahawks structured Geno. And I know he might not go for that, but what do you do?
Well, I mean, what do you do? But I think that's going to be a tough one because, I mean, Dak definitely puts himself higher than Geno in his mind. Like he was in MVP talks this year. In the first half of the year, it was like, this guy, you can flip a coin for MVP, and Dak was on one side of the coin. So, but you watch him and you continuously watch him in the playoffs. He's not gonna win you a Super Bowl. There's other factors, but I don't believe in Dak. I think he's a good quarterback. I don't. If you hinder your team by maxing that guy out and giving him, I don't even know what the market would be for him, like as far as what he's gonna be pushing for, but it's gonna really handcuff you as a franchise and really almost maybe take a step back. So I don't know, man. It could go either way. Did them bringing in Trey Lance mean anything to you at the beginning of the season, or is that just solely like depth? And I mean,
I think that was
we haven't
solely
seen
depth.
anything from him, but I mean, if you were gonna let Dak walk, I mean, he'd probably be in the mix. I mean, like we said, we haven't really got a chance to really see Trey develop. And I'm not that I'm pushing for him. I'm saying it's a tough one too because they're in a win-win now mode. But are they? I mean, they got shellacked, man. Like it wasn't even a
it
game,
wasn't
right?
close. Like, I don't know. I think you can't, like, realistically, if you look at Mike McCarthy's like record over the last 3 years, he's been in Dallas for. I don't know how he's 36 wins over 3 years. Like, that's not bad. Like, I think there's I think the issue, and it will always be an issue in Dallas, is it's Jerry and it's Jerry's world and it's all this. It's all about Jerry Jones. And I don't think it matters who the coach goes in there or what talent you have in there. Until Jerry gets out of the way of that organization, I think they're always going to kind of be this hit and miss. Like one year they may make a run and the stars may perfectly align for them and they may
Right.
make their run.
Right.
But it's not a consistent formula.
Yeah.
Like it's not something where you look at what Pete did. And like, I know we look at what we were talking about this last decade with Pete, where it was like, we were one and done in the playoffs. We weren't getting past the divisional round, but at least we had a little bit more consistency in what we were doing. They're a little bit more volatile down there in Dallas, where they'll have 3 years of great success and they'll have 3 years of absolute garbage.
Right.
Where our garbage is 9-8, 500 on the cusp of making a playoff appearance. Yeah, I don't know. It could be, it'll be interesting to say the least, to see what they kind of do down there, and how they fill possibly Dan Quinn's departure wherever he ends up going. But yeah, that's definitely one thing. The other thing that's kind of been interesting that.
But hey, hold up that thought, because we got Chris coming in right now.
Oh, he's in.
So he's in, and we're gonna bring him in, and then we can either continue that convo or get right into some juicy stuff with John Schneider and all that kind of stuff. Okay, hey guys, we got Chris Cluff joining us. Chris, former writer for the Seattle Times, and has a really good blog called Seahawk Talk. And so you guys got to go check that out. Also author of 2 books that he's written. So The Good, the Bad, the Ugly, Seahawk gut-wrenching moments in history. And Zorn said to Largent, guys, go check out those books. Chris, thanks a lot for coming on the show, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me, guys. It's gonna be an interesting ride.
Yeah, totally. Well, let's kick it off. I mean, it's awesome having you on, because John Schneider obviously had his big press conference yesterday, and obviously Bryce and myself took some things out of that. But what was your take from John? Obviously a little emotional at the beginning, and rightfully so, with working with Pete for all those years, and obviously that's going to be tough for anybody working together that long. But what was your kind of big takeaways from yesterday's press?
Yeah, I remember from Pete's presser that John looked really emotional during that, and he acknowledged that in his conference yesterday, that it was a very emotional thing, because you've been together for a long time. He has a lot of respect for Pete, and they did a lot of good things here in Seattle. So now it's John's turn, and he made it clear that he is in charge. He is in complete charge of finding a coach. He'll be in charge of all personnel. There will be no 50-50 share or anything like that. So I think that was written into his contract. He referred to it's a contractual thing. So he clearly was indicating that when he did his last contract, that that was part of it, that he will be in charge when Pete retires or leaves. So I think that's kind of the first thing, is that he is the man now. He's the man.
Right. Yeah. That was real quick, following up on that real quick, just because it was interesting, though. The one reporter near the end kind of asked him that, like, hey, you're after 14 years, you get to finally run the show. And John was kind of like, there's like a 50-50 kind of thing he was sort of hinting at, right, between Pete and himself. And he sort of shrugged it off, like, I think I've been kind of running it this whole time. Is that kind of his way of just saying, like, hey man, I'm the GM here? Like, Pete, yeah, he had a say, but it was mainly myself that kind of had the final call. Or what did you take from that?
Well, I didn't see the full conference. I'm kind
Okay.
of looking off notes and stuff, but I can definitely address what you just asked there. And to me, it is John has been the player procurement guy. Like, he
Right.
scouts them. He, sure, Pete's there at the combine and things like that, but during the season, especially, John and his pro personnel guys are always like, hey, there's these 3 guys, we're going to bring them in, you tell me, like, which one, you think is the best fit,
Right.
things like that. So as you go through the season, just kind of the day-to-day grind of, we need replacements for injuries and things like that. Like, definitely that's John Schneider, just kind of basically being there to support the coaches. But as far as like the draft and things like that, John was the one who moved. He's the one who moved here, there, and everywhere. I mean, if you think back to the Russell Wilson draft, Pete wanted Russell in the 2nd round.
Right.
You know, John's like, just wait, just wait, just wait, you know. So you know, and they got him in the third. So I mean, John he's the one who has the pulse of the other general managers in the league, and he's the one who has a lot of good relationships across the NFL. And so as far as dealing with like trades, like look at all the trades he's pulled off. I mean, not every single one has been a home run, but he has a lot of relationships where he can pull good trades, make good moves, and try and do his best to help the team. And now not always were he and Pete on the same page, because if you notice, like Bryce and I talked about this, I think a little bit last time, is the Jimmy Graham trade.
Right.
Jimmy Graham comes in and, you know, he's all of a sudden turned into an inline blocker. And I'm sure that's not what John was thinking when he traded for him, right? So they weren't always on the same page. But so in that way, John definitely had a lot of impact, but not always did they sync up.
For sure.
So with one thing that I kind of found interesting, Chris, like listening to John and like, you know, he had his emotional part at the beginning there. He used a term and he kind of backtracked after he used it, which I thought was him going, oh crap, I actually said that out loud, which was the term stagnant. Like things had gotten stagnant. And so when he used that term, to me, I found it interesting because no one's ever really, like, at least John or Pete or anyone kind of in that role with the organizations ever used that term to describe the last 14 years, or at least the last, say, 7 years, that they got stagnant. What did you take away when he used that and then tried to backtrack off of it? Was that a whoops, I let something out I shouldn't have?
Yeah, probably a little bit of a Freudian slip there, but because I saw that comment for sure. And I think what you could say about it is when they're together, they're always looking forward positively. But there's obviously was a negative thing that happened here, and that's Pete being fired. So you're looking at, you know, why was he fired? And so John's explaining that in that moment, right? And he just kind of was very candid for a second. For a second, he was very candid and said, you know, you know, we were stagnant. And, you know, it's to their credit and to Jody Allen's credit. You know, obviously John was on board with this. I'm sure personally, like as a friend, he did not like it, but professionally, I think he understood and he kind of expressed that.
Yeah. What do you take from Jody and Burt Cold and like Vulcan in general now that, you know, because when we last talked, we were talking about the sale of the team and possibly if that happens, could it happen something later? And you were very much more like, hey, this might take a couple more years because it's farther down that list of things they get to sell off. For me, them making this move put me very much in your camp, where before I was very much like, oh, I could see this team being sold sooner rather than later. Does this more put a concrete statement behind, hey, I'm here, I want to win my own Super Bowl and not just have it where my brother was the only one that won the Super Bowl owning this team?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like pretty much the same as what I said to you last time, is that she had made a statement previously that it takes 10 to 20 years to resolve an estate this large with all of the different things that Paul had, and the sports teams are sort of down at the bottom as far as, you know, dispersal goes. And I think that she does enjoy being the owner. I mean, she's made 2 huge moves in the last couple of years, trading Russell Wilson and now firing Pete Carroll. These are iconic across sports in Seattle, you know, figures. And so, you know, she has not been afraid to make either one of those moves when she felt it was time to make them. I don't see her being like, I'm done being an owner next year. You know, I know next year or this coming year, right, we talked about the date for when the state no longer gets a cut of the sale. And then everyone's then projecting, okay, so that means in 25, that's when the team will be sold. I still don't think that. I think, like, as I told you before, look toward the end of the decade. So after 25, looking up toward, you know, 2030, somewhere in that 5-year stretch, we might see that happen, but probably closer to 30 than 25, I would say.
Right.
Yeah, it's interesting you brought up the Russ situation, because actually I didn't even really put 2 and 2 together with Jody and Russ. Like, you're just thinking personnel decisions, John, Pete, and then, oh yeah, Jody Allen's the owner, so she might have a say in that, because, you know, Bryce and I have been talking, like, you don't really know what Jody's motives are, you know, like you guys talked about selling the team. Is she vested in it? And now when you bring up the 2 moves, and then it does make a lot of sense. So, you know, because when she made the move finally to let Pete go, it was sort of clear, okay, because she could have just let his contract play out. You know, it's Pete Carroll, right? The man is a legend here. He had a decent season last year, no expectations. They make the playoffs. So you could have easily said, hey, the guy had a down year. He's Pete Carroll. I'm not making any kind of I'm not ruffling any feathers or waves. Let's just kind of let it run out and then we can evaluate. So yeah, so two big moves from Jody. So to me, yeah, that kind of tells you that she's all in on, hey, I care about what happens with this franchise. So I guess maybe one last thing for me about this. Were you ultimately surprised that the move was made to let Pete go?
No, I wasn't. A lot of people call it shocking. I
Right.
definitely wouldn't characterize it as shocking. I said when Bryce and I talked about it, I said it really kind of depends on what happens because there were like 3 games left in the season. I think when you and I talked,
Yeah.
so we were kind of like, okay, let's see how the season goes. If they get into the playoffs and they win, then clearly there's probably not going to be a change. But I also said that when they don't make the playoffs, there are always coaching changes here under Pete. And that also this time it could be Pete himself, so and as the time wound down, after we had talked, I was fully on the okay, it is time for a new era. To me the defense had not improved. It's been average or much worse, especially the last 2 years, much worse, and no sign of an improvement no matter what Pete was saying. And I felt that was the time, and to me it was just a question of would Jody Allen see it the same way?
Yeah, right.
And to me, fortunately, she did, because all things have to end, and change is usually good, especially when you make it on purpose, which is done here.
So, like, we talk about, the John Schneider press conference, and some of the things I took away from it were when he got asked, like, what way are you leaning, offense or defensive style of coaching and whatnot. He did mention special teams, like, hey, special team coaches have their role. He mentioned John Harbaugh. The biggest thing for me that I took away from it was when he mentioned the Alex Smith saga in San Fran when he started, about the continuity of a coach and a quarterback, and how essentially if you hire a defensive guy, you have to have multiple succession plans in place to hit on an offensive coordinator, be prepared for him to get hired the following year, hire the next guy, and so on and so forth. Do you think that was John in a way alluding to where their mind is during this, coaching hire, considering the net they've like spread out with all these guys from Frank Smith to Raheem Morris, and now obviously Bobby Slowick and Ben Johnson are both now obviously candidates they will be interviewing. Do you think he's going to go back to his Ron Wolf Green Bay era, where if you look at Ron Wolf, it was Mike Holmgren. They had the 1 year of Ray Rhodes. They went 8-8. He axed Ray Rhodes after that and then went to Mike Sherman. Do you think that's kind of where John's going to kind of lean back to? Because he did mention he did talk to Ron for an extensive amount of time on Friday.
Yeah, I was thinking about this myself, and I do think that John will lean toward his Green Bay roots a little bit, and I do think if I were to guess, I would guess that he's going to go with an offensive coach, an innovative young offensive coach, but one who has some good defensive ties to him. That he will bring in a kind of a veteran defensive coordinator who can get this defense that has some good talented pieces on it. Get it set up, like get the scheme set properly, get these players coached properly, and just kind of be a little more assertive about it in a way that Pete Carroll and his staff were not in the end, the last couple of years especially. So I would lean that John in the end, even though he's covering all of his bases, of course, he's going across all levels here. And it could end up being a defensive coach, but I think he's seen a defensive coach and he's seen plenty of that. And I think he's going to lean offense if he has a chance. Now, this, of course, depends on what the coaches do, right, and where they end up. All these coaches have choices, the top ones, right? So you're talking Ben Johnson, Bobby Slowick, these guys will have options. So maybe that kind of, narrows down your options of whether, okay, well, I did want like these two offensive coaches, but my third guy is the defensive coach, and that's what we ended up with is the third choice, right. So some of that may end up coming into play. You never know. So, but I would lean offense. I definitely would. And I agree with you on the Green Bay idea of going back to kind of his roots on that.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm happy to kind of hear that because that's sort of we were kind of debating, like, there's a lot of emphasis on like is an offense head coach, defense head coach, and it's nice to have a balance of like, because at the end of the day, you need that guy to be the ultimate leader too, right? And that's the thing. So it's like, is McDaniels in Miami, is he that ultimate leader yet? Like, I guess time will tell. Obviously, they didn't have a good showing in Kansas City. So, but I like the offensive um coach myself, just because when you look at, I think like Bryce and I talked about, we could really pivot and be that offensive style of team with a solid defense, right? Like we have the pieces. So it's just a matter of like just kind of getting that offense on track with all the weapons, the young weapons we have, DK and JSN and everybody. So that's sort of exciting, right? And I agree with all what you said. It's just it was time, and it's just time to turn a new leaf over and just get excited about the next whatever years the next guy comes in, and like we brought up the example with Gannon down in Arizona, right? Like that fan base, talking to a few people, seem to be excited, even though they only had a few wins. They feel like they got that foundation with the new GM, new coach, and they're on the rise, sort of, and in their mind, time will tell. So I think that's sort of the position we want to be in, and I guess so just kind of moving from that, I guess if you kind of look at I mean, the season in review, if we kind of look at the whole year, what do you rate it? I mean, it was tough, right? It was like we have a 9-8 year. The year before, we come in, almost had the same statistics, right? When you look at the run defense and
Yeah.
the record. We were excited last year, right? But so
Well,
what would you grade it, and what was your overall sort of review?
let's look at what John Schneider said in his presser. He
Right.
said, last year we overachieved. This year
Mm-hmm.
we underachieved.
Right.
So you come in last year, they didn't know Geno Smith was going to step up and be as good as he was, And I think John talked about how, he kind of flipped his seasons. Like, last year he started fast and sort of faded. And this year he started slow and then totally, finished with a lot of a good clutch wins, And so I think you're looking at, as a season, it was definitely disappointing. I personally picked the Seahawks for 10 wins. That's what I picked them for before the season, and with 9 to 10, not 10 to 11, but 9 to 10. I was on the low end of the 10.
Okay.
And and my projection was that the run defense would not be fixed.
Hmm.
So I looked wrong early in the season because the first 4 or 5 games they were really good against the run, and then after that,
why would you thinking that, like, because we did overhaul, so like obviously your
yeah,
prediction was spot on, but what was it?
yeah.
Was it more the scheme, Clint? Because obviously we brought in some big money guys like Draymond Jones, and so was that your feeling? Just you just didn't believe in Clint and the scheme, and
My thought was that they don't have a nose tackle for the 3-4 that they want to run, and that they had the same linebackers who were getting beat all the time. Previously they brought back Bobby Wagner, who had not had a good last season before he left Seattle. So I don't care about Pro Bowls and All Pros and all that stuff.
No.
That's reputation type of stuff.
Yeah.
So I early in the season, Bobby Wagner was going forward, and he was making plays. He was aggressive. They had him right at the line. He was making plays at the line, behind the line. But then the more you get him into chase mode, and I hark back to the Christian McCaffrey 72-yard run in the beginning of that game, the Niners game, and how all of our linebackers and safeties overran the play. Every single one of them. Brooks, Wagner, Quandre Diggs all overran it. Jamal Adams got all turned around, and off McCaffrey went to the races. And that, to me, that really signified, as much as anything that you need to see in the entire season, that one play signified this defense. And not only just what happened on the field, but what Pete said after the fact was, he said the night before, he actually stressed to them, do not over pursue McCaffrey. And they did it on the first play, and he was so frustrated by it. To me, that just like says everything you need to know about the defense, that it was not following its coaching. It was not being coached properly, not following the coaching. The players were mavericking it, and they were not playing as a unit. They weren't playing like the old kind of. Nobody's going to be Legion of Boom again, but you need to have that cohesiveness as a defense, right? So to me, that's how I just kind of look at the season in a nutshell.
Okay, yeah.
So based off like how we're talking about the defense, and obviously it is this new era, Chris, like what players like in your mind are guaranteed not going to see the 2024 Seahawk training camp that are on this roster currently, whether they're a free agent or not, or in the last year of their deal? Like I know a couple off top of my head, like I think of like Jamal Adams, like he'll be gone. There's no way
Yeah,
he's going to be back in Seattle.
right.
I think Quandre is going to be another one that's going to be gone with his cap hit and just lack of playing the position correctly. And, I just I can't really think of like on the offensive side, I can see more guys sticking around. Like maybe Tyler retires, maybe is the shock on offense. But like I just defensively, Witherspoon, like I was talking with Armac about it, and I even said I'd trade Woolen and try and get a second round pick for Woolen or a third round pick for
He's
Woolen.
unfortunately he's not even worth that right now,
I know, and
Bryce.
that's the problem is like based off what he
Yeah.
did his rookie year, you could have got something like that for him. Now you'd be lucky to get what you like. He was so bad this year.
Yeah.
So like, what are some players you don't foresee being back on this team?
I don't foresee. I agree with you on Jamal Adams. That's an easy cut. Get him healthy so that then they don't have to pay an injury settlement for him. Will Dissly, I don't see him back. He's way overpaid. He always has been from the day John Schneider signed him to that silly deal. Brian Monet is an easy like 6 million savings or something like that. So he won't be back. Yeah, obviously he was injured all year anyway. And then I mean, to me the question is, it sort of comes down to Diggs or Lockett, and I lean that they don't really need Diggs. Diggs hasn't shown that he's worth what they paid him. At the time they paid him, I was totally in favor of it because he had been making plays.
Right.
But then now he hasn't been making the plays. So, you don't need to pay the guy that anymore. You have Jordan Love at one safety, so you just need to fill the other safety. Now, maybe they don't do that right away. I mean, usually when they make these kind of cuts, if they're going to cut a guy, they cut him pretty early. Like Schneider usually cuts the guys early. As far as Lockett, I know there are a lot of people who talk about, oh, we can save all this money with Lockett. Yeah, you can save money with Lockett, but then what do you do for a third receiver that everybody was clamoring for last year? Right. If you remember, so much of the fan base was like, we need a third receiver. So they draft JSN and everybody's super happy. And then now all of a sudden everyone's like, okay, we got to cut Lockett. And I kind of chuckle about that because that doesn't make any sense, based on what you were just saying last year, and now you're saying the opposite this year. So I personally don't think that they need to cut Tyler Lockett for money. There's a lot of ways that they can add money through all those other players we just mentioned. And the question is like, who are they going to pay? Like, what do you need the money for? So if you're cutting all these guys to get some cap space, who are you going after? Like, what do you expect to pay? Now,
Right.
Leonard Williams, he's a free agent and certainly deserving of pay. So he was like, if you want to say who are their top 3 defenders coming back next year, you already mentioned Witherspoon, Bryce, and then Nwosu, who we kind of all missed, when he got hurt, like their pass rush went away. And so they definitely miss him. So you got Nwosu, you got Witherspoon, and if they can re-sign Leonard Williams, those are your top 3 defenders on this team. So I think John's going to make a pretty big pitch to Leonard Williams to stay, but it also depends on what the new coach wants, so you have to get your staff in place but I mean, Williams will fit whatever. He will fit whatever. So I think Schneider's probably thinking, yes, that's my number one priority, is to see if Leonard Williams wants to stay here and what it will take to keep him here. And obviously Leonard has no loyalty to Seattle because he was traded here, so he will go wherever the money is. Yeah, because he's winding down his career. He's still a solid player. He's going to get one more big contract this year, and he'll go wherever the money is. I guarantee it. Whoever pays him the most. That's unless he's going to like the bottom of the bottom teams, and maybe like the money is similar or a little close. He might might not go for the top, but that's real go. So anyway, those are some of the players, and that's kind of how I look at the defense sort of shaking out. And then of course it depends on who the defensive coordinators and what kind of scheme they're going to run and all that, as to some of the other players and who stays and who goes. Like, what do they pay Brooks? What's Brooks worth? What's his market like, in free agency, and what's he worth to the Seahawks and their new defensive coordinator?
Right. Yeah, no, because for me, there's the interesting thing for me with these guys, who they're going to cut, is like you were saying, like John and Pete were kind of symbiotic in who they kept. Listening back, just going kind of back to the press conference, I get the vibe that sometimes guys were kept longer than they were wanted to by Pete, because he did theoretically have final say on personnel and whatnot. Where I look at some of the guys like, a Quandre, Nick Bellore, Jason Myers even. And I even think Geno falls in that category of a guy that was a Pete Carroll guy, like, where they could, like, and I agree, you could keep Geno, but obviously he's got a lot of money that's due to him coming up this year, the 31 whatever million it is, and he can restructure it however. But I think it'll be interesting to see some of these Pete guys that have been here long term or longer than maybe they should have, if John doesn't move on from them, just because he's now in full control of everything.
That is actually a great point about what is John Schneider's approach to that going to be going forward. It's such a great point, Bryce, because you really, it's just a great question of how many guys would he have already gotten rid of, or what guys would he have traded, but Pete didn't want, like Russell Wilson, he would have traded him a year before. Definitely.
Oh,
yeah. He would have made the Chicago deal, but Pete didn't want to. He was ready. Yeah. Like John knew it was time, but Pete didn't want to let go yet. And so he didn't for Pete, for Pete's sake. Yeah. So, just, it just comes down to like, kind of how does John look at it? And now granted, we have to understand the way John works. He's used to a partnership, and he talked in his presser about, I want a new partner, right. So he's going to work. He wants somebody to be 50-50 with, even though he's going to be their boss and he is over everything now. But I think he doesn't want to just say, here's what you got, go make it work. Right. That's not how he operates. So there will be definitely some, another symbiotic relationship developing, right.
Yeah. So obviously to tie, so depending who he hires for a coach, I guess if we look, just kind of fast forward a little bit to the draft, just because we could go any which way with quarterback, I guess. Like Geno and Locke both might not be there. Do we draft a quarterback? Or me and Bryce and myself were even discussing, depending on the coach and what their needs are, you go draft sort of a solid free agent quarterback. But kind of looking at the draft, we sit at 16. We tossed Penix's name around quite a bit. And talking to a few people, they're sold on him, but not, like, his ceiling is kind of limited in a way, like not superstar potential. So at 16, I mean, if John's sitting there and Penix is there, what would your thoughts be on that? Or like, do you really have to like love the guy? Or if you don't, you just got to move on, wait for day 2 kind of thing. What do you think of that?
Yeah, I mean, I know that there's, I call them Sea Dogs, the Seahawk and Husky fans combined. They always like to see the Sea Dogs, nice. like their Huskies in right. Seattle blue, right? And so there definitely is some merit to that idea, and I think it just comes down to where does Penix end up ranking? What like, how does John Schneider see him? So the Seahawks are in an interesting spot, because typically most drafts, as you guys know, there are really only 14 to 16 guys rated as first rounders. And then everyone after that, all the way into the 40s, are basically the same caliber of player. So that's where, and then the Seahawks have been drafting so deep in the first round for most of the time, most of Pete Carroll era, that they end up with kind of a guy, like they've said multiple times, oh yeah, we were going to draft him in the first round, but we were able to trade down a couple of times and get him in the second round. So I think like Paul Richardson was one of those guys, there was a couple guys that they're like, oh yeah, we would have taken him in the first round, but we were able to get a few more picks and then we still got him, so those guys are all the same caliber of guy. And if you look around the league, like the bust rate, especially at the bottom half of the first round, is just 50-50 or worse on some drafts. Let's not talk about the 2013 draft, probably one of the worst in ages, but that kind of thing, where you just don't know what you're going to get in a total crapshoot. And so going back to the quarterback idea of Penix, okay, where do they rate him? Is he a bottom first round type of guy, or is he does he slip to the second? Because we always see guys who, like, they kind of get projected by analysts in the first round, but the entire NFL, all along, NFL teams were like, that guy's like third round guy. So you never know, like, kind of where, like, how they're going to rank them, and also how the draft's going to fall, because some team falls in love with a guy and maybe they move up above Seattle and get the guy just before Seattle was going to pick him or something like that. So it's hard to say exactly. And then Penix is like you said, he's kind of got a ceiling, but he also has some really sharp skills that do match the NFL. Like his quick release and his deep ball and all that. He can really spin the football, So it's just he doesn't have a lot of mobility. And is he going to be able to read the field well, which is always a question for any quarterback coming out. So I don't know. Penix is going to be an interesting idea. Quarterback in general for the Seahawks will be certainly a thought. If there's another guy there, not even necessarily Penix, but somebody else, I can see Schneider at 16. He's in the perfect spot to either go up or go down. So he's right in the smack middle, and he has ammunition, so they can kind of move around and do what they. I know they lost their second rounder in the Leonard Williams deal, but I think they have the extra third rounder, right? So they got some things that he could do if he wanted to go up. Certainly he can go down and add more picks and move around the board. So we'll see how it goes. It's going to be interesting once we get to that part of it.
Yeah, I could see like it is an interesting spot where he is at 16. And like you said, yeah, to me, it's like unless he really has someone that he's fallen in love with, I could just totally see him kind of swapping that out for a couple extra picks just because of the fact, like you said, we lost our second rounder. So that has to be weighing in the back of his mind too. Like, you know what, I'm kind of in the game of accumulating a few more picks, kind of his history of doing that too, right? So we'll see. We'll see.
I think it'll be interesting with whoever they hire as coach, because I could see if they get a Ben Johnson or a Bobby Slowick or a Brian Callahan that goes, I like Drake May or I like Jaden Daniels or whoever maybe falls a little bit and saying, that's who I want, let's move up. I think it really depends on who our coach is. If they somehow end up with a Dan Quinn or a Mike Vrabel, I think there's a higher chance that we see Geno when they draft a Spencer Rattler or Bo Nix or somebody in the later round, second or third round. But yeah, that's kind of my thought process. It really depends who we hire, because John kept going back to that. You want that symbiotic relationship between coach and quarterback. And the Alex Smith thing, that was just really a very detailed, and like, again, with John Schneider, it's going to be now going forward, how everyone used to kind of read between Pete talk, essentially. I feel like with John, he gives you these little tidbits every once in a while in his press conferences. And that one to me was one that really stood out in what direction I think he wants to go. I think he wants to finally draft a quarterback. Again, going back to that Ron Wolf kind of era, that's what Green Bay did. They drafted quarterbacks constantly between whether it was the second and third round and fourth round, and then ended up, would ship the guys off, Brunell, Hasselbeck, Aaron Brooks, whoever. And you look at, Jordan Love, and that philosophy still stays there in Green Bay. Draft him, let him sit for 3 or 4 years, and then he starts, and all of a sudden he looks like the next coming of Brett Favre and Aaron Rodgers. But overall, Chris, what is your overall kind of feelings towards the Pete Carroll era, as now that it's finally come to a close? That entire time, what are your thoughts on it?
I think the Pete Carroll era was 2 eras in one. I think it was the Legion of Boom era that ended in 2017, really 2016, but they were all still there in 2017. Everybody got hurt and all that. And then the 18 to now. And I feel like he was never able to replicate, he and John Schneider, despite all their efforts, John Schneider bringing in player after player, making lots of different trades, and Pete Carroll bringing in, changing defensive coordinators, tweaking his scheme here and there a couple times. None of these efforts paid off. After the Legion of Boom was dismantled after the 2017 season, and they had a historic run that we can all. I don't even think the three of us would even argue that it should have been better than it was. Obviously the Patriots Super Bowl was a real bummer, and the players themselves from that era have said if they had won the Patriots Super Bowl, they would have been super motivated to win the next Super Bowl. And their motivation level went down after that Patriots Super Bowl. And you could see it because Cam Chancellor held out, though he just signed a new contract. And you could just see that the attitudes were not great. And even though they were still playing and they were still like a number 1 defense, like what, 4 straight years as the number 1 scoring defense in the NFL. Had only been done one other time before. And they were still playing at a high level, but not with the same kind of motivation because they didn't have the confidence in the coach. And they've all said that. Like a bunch of them have come out and said that. KJ Wright said that. Others, Cliff Averill, others have said that. So I feel like we saw 2 eras of the Pete Carroll regime, and the last one is the reason that he's gone.
Yeah, hey, following up on that, I guess that makes total sense, kind of two in one, because when you look at it, when the Legion of Boom kind of goes away and all this kind of stuff, it was like he almost tried to just keep replicating the same thing. And like instead of sort of pivoting a little bit, like I just felt like this year, for example, I just felt like we could have had such a dynamic offense. Like we could have been a team that just did so much more on offense. And it was like just the same thing. Like he had Marshawn Lynch back there and a superstar defense back there that, he doesn't have to go on 4th and 1 at midfield. He kicks it. So I love him, right? Like I love what he did here, but just things that were sort of like, it's like, I don't want to say the game passed him, but like analytics, is a huge thing now. When he first came in, it really wasn't. Like 4th down, guys were killing guys. Guys do crazy stuff on 4th down on their own, whatever now. But I just feel like, I think it was the last game Bryce and I were talking about, the Arizona game. It was 4th and 1, and he just decides to bring the punt team out, and you're just like, you don't have the Legion of Boom back there, right? And I just felt like he always wanted to, Devin Witherspoon, hey, we could be the Legion of Boom again. And it's like, no, that will never exist. And I just felt like the players we had offensively, it could have just been a bit of a tweak in the other direction. Like, and like another example, and maybe I get your thoughts on this. One more thing about the offense is just, his whole thing was run the ball, run the ball, run the ball. And you draft 2 running backs in the second round back-to-back years. What was your thought on how they were used? Like I felt like Zach, I didn't get to almost evaluate him enough. I just felt like I liked what I saw. He was a aggressive thumper and wanted to hit guys. Did you feel like that could have been done a little differently with the backfield, with Walker and Charbonnet? Or
Oh, well, I'll just kind of start with the offensive line and all the injuries
right?
that it had, especially the tackles being out like in game 1, basically, and Abe Lucas's future, quite frankly, in question. So they really had an uphill battle on the offensive line, and they just did not. Their interior is not good enough, and it needs to be upgraded this year. Bryce and I talked about this last time. Their interior O line, Gino needs more blocking in the middle of him, in the middle for himself, and also for their interior run game for sure. But getting to the running backs, when they drafted Charbonnet, another second round running, like I was really in favor of Walker in the second round when they drafted him, because I was like, they need a really good running back, and this is a second round that is a perfect value for a guy with all the accolades he had and just all the skill set he brings to them. He can catch the ball, he can pretty much do everything. I thought that was a great pick. When they used the second round pick on Charbonnet, when they had a bunch of defensive line needs, I really was sort of disappointed in that, because there were some defensive linemen there that I thought maybe they could target. And now I'm not an expert on that. I just kind of see them a little bit like everybody does. And you have to project them into your system, whatever your system is, and so I was sort of disappointed that they used another second round pick on a running back. But then let's go to the field, as you asked, Ryan, and they're totally different running backs as we see them. I mean, Walker, look at those cutbacks he made in the last game. I mean, he's like zipping down the field. It reminded me of Kurt Warner. I don't know if you guys ever saw clips of Kurt Warner, but in his heyday, Kurt Warner was a cutback king. He would go left, it would be all a mess, and he would cut back to the right, and 60 yards later, touchdown. And those Walker runs that he had just at the end of the season were really reminiscent to me of that era. A great cutback runner, a guy who plays totally off schedule sometimes, and he's comfortable with that. But the problem is, it's taken him a little bit to learn how to hit the hole properly and all that. That's been his bugaboo. Is he's gotten a lot better at it this year. He got a lot better at it, but Charbonnet is definitely right off the bat better at that. Like you said, he's a smasher. He bangs it right through the hole and gets, hey, if it's 3 yards, he gets the 3 yards, and sometimes he'll break it. Sometimes he'll break it because he's a big guy and he runs tough, and he'll break it off from 15 yards, so totally kind of different. To me, Charbonnet is an inside runner, and Walker is more of an outside guy. And so they don't really have a complete back at the moment. They're both working the way to become that. But in this era of the NFL, everybody uses 2 running backs anyway, so it's okay.
Well, it's interesting to me because, I look at that backfield and it got kind of crowded at I guess, over the halfway point this year when Kenny McIntosh, who apparently was doing extremely well in training camp, finally got healthy, but he never saw the field. And the thing that used to drive me nuts watching, again, this drives me back into the Pete Carroll thing, is Pete Carroll's guys. DJ Dallas was a Pete Carroll guy. And he tried, like, I think he's a great person and all that kind of stuff. But watching DJ Dallas, when he'd step on the field on offense, I'd go, okay, so we're not really doing anything with our running back. We were almost playing with 10 guys on the field because DJ Dallas isn't going to do anything. I feel
Wildcat.
Oh God, what you mean the Wildcat that we, botched things on before with him back in there? Like
Interception?
Yeah, exactly. And they had him as a punt returner and the kickoff returner. And I'm like, Kenny McIntosh was one of the top backs at Georgia, which is not a small program. And you remember listening to John talk about it, like it's not very often like an SEC top back falls to the 7th round of the draft and you're able to scoop him up and he's a starter. So for me, that's where, again, I just look at Pete Carroll's favorites, Pete Carroll's guys, quote unquote. I feel like that really did do things to, cause our offense problems and hiccups, whether it's his influence with Shane Waldron on what was getting called. I also wasn't a big Shane Waldron fan. I didn't think he was a great play caller. Because you look at DK, how many times DK was basically 1 or 2 catches the first quarter and then non-existent until, there's 2 minutes left in the fourth quarter of the game. Let's just pepper DK with 8 targets. Like it drove me absolutely nuts. And so that's the one thing for me, looking at whoever they bring in going forward, is how do you use all these weapons? And for me, like, I'm just going to kind of throw this out there to everybody here, but my top 3 coaching candidates, or I guess 4, we'll go with 4 because it's an even a number then. Ben Johnson and Bobby Slowick are 1 and 2 for me because, again, like you and me, Chris, have talked kind of off the pod about Bobby Slowick and his history. His dad coached in the league for years. He comes off the Shanahan tree. He will have possibly some defensive guys that he's able to bring in as defensive coordinators and defensive guys to help him out in that regard. The only thing for me is he hasn't been an OC very long. He's been it for 1 year kind of a thing. So it would be interesting to see how he would interview. Ben Johnson, to me, with what he's done in Detroit with 2 running backs, Gibbs and Montgomery, that are very much kind of like Ken Walker and Charbonnet. You got Montgomery, who's I'm going to go straight ahead. Gibbs is your slasher cutback guy. And how he just uses all those weapons, I think would be it would allow Seattle to hit the ground running more, I think, as an offense. I don't know what his connections defensively are because I don't know Ben Johnson's history a great deal beyond what he did in Detroit. And then the other 2, Mike McDonald from Baltimore, if we had to go to the defensive side, like you were saying, if those 2 kind of top guys aren't there, because of his innovation with Baltimore's defense and what they've been able to do. And then my dark horse that's kind of, for some reason, even on national media started to get a little steam here is Mike Vrabel. What are your thoughts on if Vrabel ended up being the guy that they ended up bringing in here to Seattle?
Well, he's a veteran coach who's had success. He's I don't know, his offenses haven't been great. So I would wonder like who he would bring in as his offensive coordinator. They really relied on Derrick Henry a lot during his time there in Tennessee. So very much a run-based thing. And the Seahawks have invested a fair amount in their receivers. I fully agree with you that the Seahawks, with both you and Ryan said this earlier, like their offense has a lot of talent. So it's not like they like I said, like I referenced, they need to just kind of shore up the middle blocking. If they can get in some interior linemen who are just a bit of an upgrade, or however they want to do it, whether it's scheme or what, they just need to get better in the middle, and that will help the running game, which was just so disappointing this year. It will help the running game really, just kind of take some pressure off of Geno Smith. I think Geno's going to be back, so I'm saying, pressure off Geno and allow him to look at the field and stuff. I mean, I think Geno I think we talked about this before, Bryce. Geno's a really good player when he has guys around him that are doing their jobs as well. And he just showed he had 7 clutch touchdown passes this year. I mean, that's really great. I mean, that was a big question for me about him, is can he win in the clutch? And granted, there were a lot of games that they lost or got blown out in or whatever, but obviously most of the games they won were pretty close games, and required him to pull out some stunts at the end that people would say, oh, that's Russell Wilson-esque. He used to do that back in the day. So anyway, I feel like their offense, as far as coaching goes, yeah, let's bring in a coach who can just make these guys work, like both of you guys have said, that make these guys come together and fulfill their potential. I think that's what we're talking about, is fulfill the potential of a really talented offense with 2 running backs, 3 receivers, a good enough quarterback, and just a line that needs to be upgraded a little bit.
So who would be your top 3 candidates then, Chris, that you've seen or possibly that are out there? Who would you go 1, 2, and 3 for you?
I agree with you that Ben Johnson's done a lot of good stuff with, think of this, similar style of quarterback, Jared Goff, kind of Geno Smith. They're similar guys, right? And a little bit of mobility, but mostly pocket passers who spread the ball around and try to find the guy who's open, and veteran guys, veteran quarterbacks. So he's used to dealing with a veteran quarterback. Like you said, 2-headed running back with just kind of both different skill sets. He would come to a situation that's very similar to what he had in Detroit, and then it just come down to the question of defense. And I think he was in Miami for quite a while. And their defense in Miami, I was looking at kind of who the defensive coaches were there, and there wasn't really one theme for me to find there about like where he would go to fill out his staff. I guess we'll find that one out as it comes, but wherever he lands. But yeah, I would say him. Bobby Slowick, I'm in on him and the things he did with CJ Stroud right off the bat. It shows me that he has a lot of ability to turn an offense up. That's a young offense in Houston, really young. So, I mean, Seattle's got a little more veteranness to it as far as the receivers go. So, and the quarterback too. So, I mean, I think he could come in and take advantage of veteran savvy of some of those players. So, and I'm definitely leaning offense. If I'm picking, I'm leaning offense, and then an offensive guy that just kind of finds a good, solid veteran defensive coordinator who knows what to do with the talent here. So that's kind of where I would lean.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. Like I said before, because I think the biggest reason I think I agree with you on that too is just we just did 14 years, with kind of the defensive coach style and Pete and the run game, and so that, like, I wouldn't be upset with Vrabel. But like you said, he relied heavy on Derrick Henry. So, running the football and not crazy in the passing game. And when you look at us right now, DK and JSN could be a ridiculous 1-2 punch at receiver. And then, like you said, keep locking around because he's still good. So, and then he'll be that third,
you need Arizona.
And because, look at the strides JSN took, right? So,
yeah.
That's why it's kind of like, let's just turn the chapter and get to some guy who's doing something completely different, right? Like Dan Quinn, Vrabel, it's, I wouldn't say boring, but it's, I think you know what I mean. It's just kind of like, let's just try and have a shootout with some teams. And
here's a stat just to throw at you, Ryan. 5 of the last 6 Super Bowls have been won by offensive head coaches.
Right. Yeah, I've seen that. Yeah. So that tells you.
Yeah,
it's a different league. And I think that's why, going back to the Pete thing, and even John alluded to one quick thing, and we won't keep you too much longer here, but when he alluded to the Schottenheimer thing, like, he once told me that you don't want to, basically a coach's shelf life is 10 years, something else he kind of threw out there. And it's like, well, wait a sec, Pete's been here for 14 or something, right? So it's like he's expired, kind of what he's kind of getting at it in so many words, right? So it's just, and it's like, because things change, right? It's a new, and not that Pete can't coach. I mean, you could still have success somewhere. And I think you look at it though, and it's like the NFL is different. Like you said, 4 of the last 5, you can have a solid, good defense and still win. You don't have to have this, recreate a Legion of Boom and stuff like that to win a Super Bowl. So I think we're kind of set up. Like you said, I'm fine with Geno. If they roll Geno and, like you said, fix up that interior a bit and give him some time to throw the ball around the yard a little bit and fix up that run game a bit so he can work off that play. I mean, I think we could be set up and just kind of get that right coach. So it'll be interesting to see in the next week or so, or whenever they get that. They talk about interviews starting today. So yeah,
I would just go to the coaching history a little bit. Remember the Mike Holmgren era,
right?
Basically, they hired him in 1999, and he took a few years to get them really in a playoff mode. But then they had 5 really good years, including that Super Bowl. And then they kind of set up this weird thing with Jim Mora that didn't work out, and there was a 1-year gap basically between Holmgren and Pete Carroll arriving. And then Pete took off. It took him just a couple years to get this thing going.
Yeah.
So I say to the people that they're so upset that Pete Carroll was fired, why?
Yeah.
Like, look at what just happened. We've had over 20 years of really good, mostly really good football in Seattle. And one of the most successful franchises it's the Green Bay Packers and the Seattle Seahawks in the NFC over that time. That's it. So, and then guys behind them. So, I mean, the Eagles maybe have caught up a little bit now, but the Seahawks are right there in the top 3 for sure in the NFC over that time frame. And why can't it keep going?
Right.
Why can't John Schneider find a guy?
Yeah. Yeah. And like you said, John sort of knows when time is, move on and get to the next thing. I mean, I think those people just, you love what Pete did here for so many years, and change is tough, and letting things go and moving on is tough for some people, and people just got to realize, hey, this is a good thing for the Seahawks. Like, this is going to be a good thing. Who knows how long it's going to take, but it might not take that long. Get the right pieces in play, right? So.
Yeah, it's okay to take a couple steps back and then for 2 years and then take off for another decade.
Exactly.
The one thing that I worry about in this market here for whoever the new coach is, if it's not DQ, and I was watching and listening to the KJ Wright show today, and he's again a massive endorser of DQ. He says that's who the next head coach needs to be. A lot of these ex-Legion of Boom members, because they played for Dan Quinn, view it as, hey, we need to bring Dan Quinn in because they want to keep that culture going from Pete. And what I keep saying is, you have John Schneider. He knows what that culture is. He's been in it for 14 years. You don't need to keep a Pete Carroll, not, runoff, but a Pete Carroll disciple in here to keep that going. John can keep that going whichever way he wants. But like me and Armac, and we've both been kind of going back and forth on it, is, they need to turn the page, bring in someone, and even John alluded to it with the stagnant comment with we need to learn to evolve. That's what I want. I want someone to bring in balance and evolve. And I think that's his way of saying, without subtly saying, like, we needed to make this change if we were ever going to go back to where we want to be, which is a Super Bowl contending team.
Yeah. His quote was, if you're stagnant in this league, you're behind.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which the Seahawks have been for, like you said, since 2018, we've been behind.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hey,
one playoff win.
Yeah, no, that exactly. And I think that's, people got to look at that. But anyways, hey, Chris, it was awesome having you on, man, coming on. We really appreciate it. Kind of hanging out had you on here for almost an hour. It's awesome talking to you. Before we let you go, why don't you let everyone know what you've been up to and how they can find all your work and all your social platforms and all that good stuff.
Oh yeah. I'm as Bryce knows, because we got to get on Twitter, our Mac.
Yeah, we will.
Bryce and I are all over it all the time on that. So
okay.
Yeah, but it's at Seahawk Talk, HAWK_TALK, and then that also is my little blog that I get more active in the off season because there's a lot more speculative stuff and things that like become a little more interesting. And I'm pretty savvy with the salary cap and stuff, so I like to break down things sometimes. So like you'll start seeing a lot more stuff, especially as we get into February and March and April, because those are the hot months, right? There's a new season starting here for these teams that aren't in the playoffs right now.
Exactly.
So there it is. That's where you see me.
Awesome. Okay, guys, go check out Chris's stuff. And again, Chris, appreciate it. And hopefully we'll have you on again soon and talk, I don't know, draft and whatever else is happening this new season here. So
yeah, thanks for having me, guys. It was fun. Time flies when you're talking to Seahawks.
That's right. Okay.
Thanks, Chris.
Chris. Thanks, man. Hey, guys, that was Chris Cluff on the show. Man, like, awesome talking with Chris, man. Like, you know what I mean? The insight he brings just, not only does he know Seahawks football inside and out, but just the history that he's covered that team for so long. So he knows, from way back, he's not like, hey, I've just been, covering the Hawks for the last 4 or 5 years. Like, I've covered the Hawks and I know I've seen this kind of coach and that kind of coach and this kind of style. And, so having him on the show and just that alone is pretty cool. And then just with some of the things he was bringing up today, man, like what was some of your takeaways?
A couple of my takeaways is I think because of his, extensive background with the Mike Holmgren era and Mike Holmgren coming from Green Bay and whatnot, like, and how he said, like, we've had almost 25 years of exceptional coaching in Seattle. Like, we've kind of taken that for granted. Like, people forget about Mike Holmgren easily now because he didn't win a Super Bowl. He only took us to one.
Yeah.
But he was extremely successful. We had multiple division championships under Mike Holmgren. And so, then you run into the Pete era and Pete takes off. We go to our Super Bowls back to back, and we've had this long, extended, reign of success. But like a big thing I took away is like, even he thinks, based on what he saw in the Schneider press conference, that they're going to go offense. They're going to go an offensive-minded young guy, which is what you and me have both been clamoring for. Like, steer into the trend now that the NFL is. And I've heard the opposite from other people being like, oh, no, like, we need to go defense because of Shanahan and McVay. We got to find some way of stopping them. Well, just a tidbit that, another little interesting fact, 8 out of the top 13 DVOA defenses. So tying back to Mike Sando, when he talked about our DVOA being so bad, 8 out of 13 of those top teams are offensive minded head coaches.
Well, yeah.
So,
And the other thing about that too is you went out and drafted a JSN. You brought in a Zach Charbonnet, a second rounder. So if you were so in tune of like, and we haven't even switched coaches yet, but you know what I mean?
Yep.
They know that they had to get some more firepower. Even if they're like, you and me talked about this, beat it like a dead horse, man. Like, they didn't have an identity last year. So I don't even know what they were doing, but you got some pieces in place now that, like we talked about with Chris, if you can go offensive minded coach and tweak some things here and get the right guy calling plays and fixing your interior. I agree 100%. We talked about that. And here's the other thing, when he brought up Abe Lucas, man, that is a huge concern
He went under
because
knee surgery today.
I think, I hate to say it though, man. And sometimes guys, the big boys like that, when they're having knees like that, it's like, I don't want to say it. You might have to be looking for somebody replacing him sooner than you think.
I think they're going to have to. And he went in for knee surgery today. He posted on his social he was having a knee operation done. So maybe that helps. Like, maybe he gets his knee, like, depending on what the injury is. And that was the one thing that kind of annoyed me all year. Seattle never really told us what it
They
was.
never do, yeah.
It wasn't an ACL. It wasn't this. The fact that one of the terms I heard that was used by Pete is, oh, it's like jumper's knee, which worried me because that's like, okay, is that his patellar tendon that's about to like let go? And we went through that with Will Dissly and Jimmy Graham. Like, that's a hard injury to come back from. And so I agree with you. I think there needs to be, like, with this new coach coming in and whatnot, like, hey, like, is our right tackle going to be our right tackle for the next 5 years? Or do we need to like consider drafting a guy this year? Like, I think there's a very good chance Gino's on this roster next year as a quarterback.
I agree with that.
Whether they restructure his deal or however they do it, I think Gino will be here. It'll be very interesting to see what transpires with, the hiring, who it is. One name out there, and this is, two guys actually, I should say, that, besides Bobby Slowick and Ben Johnson, who are kind of the upper echelon guys, Mike Kafka, who they have coming in for an interview, and Frank Smith. He's the OC in Miami. Now, the interesting thing with Frank Smith, and this is something that kind of caught my attention, was the NFLPA put out a survey from their players on who some of the top coordinators in the NFL. He got voted number 1 over Ben Johnson, over these guys, as number 1 because of how he's able to communicate. And that's one thing we have to kind of think about too when we're hiring this guy, is how does he communicate? How does he teach? That's what he's doing at that point. So
how does he lead?
Right. And so some of these guys that they've put an interview request in for a head coach, and this is another thing, they may circle back and look at these guys as coordinators, whether it's
totally
Graham or Evro or Kafka, even like, or a Frank Smith, like, hey, they hired Bobby Slowick and then they bring in Frank Smith as an OC because now he gets to call plays or whatever it is. Those are some things to kind of always be mindful of when you see these coaching candidates come out for head coaching, is they're also doing their due diligence for coordinators. Like, who are some guys that we're going to keep on our short list that we may go back to?
Yeah, that's a good point because I mean that's why you interview for any job, right? You gotta okay, the resume looks good. I like what you did down there. Let's bring you in. Let's talk to you, right? Because I gotta get a feel and can you lead this group? Can you lead this locker room? And that is the most important thing. Like it's great if you're offensive minded, and you know what? You just don't fit that bill. But I would love to have you as a potential offensive coordinator. Once we pick our guy, but because that's a big thing. And one name, you can. There's new maybe there's other reasons, all this kind of stuff. But when you bring up like Eric Bieniemy, everyone's like that guy hasn't got a head coaching job, no head coaching, he's he was doing his thing down in Kansas City and all this kind of stuff. And because sometimes you just like they said, he doesn't interview well, like that. He's just a guy that you're a great coordinator. And that's the thing, like, man, it's like it's so funny when a guy has success as a coordinator. It's like, well, he has to take a next step. His next step's head coach. Like, he has to. Like, he has to get one. But no, that's not guys. Some guys aren't can't do that position. It's like anything. You can be good at this, but you're not good at that. So it's like um, yeah, but the same can be said for like coordinators. Like, you come from a certain tree. Like, look at all the guys that came from the Belichick tree that got head coaching jobs, man. Like, and most of them were failures. It's just people get caught up in like, well, everyone had success there. So everyone's got to be I'd hire him as head coach. It's like, I don't knee-jerk reaction sometimes, I guess you could say. You know what I mean? It's
The most successful coaching tree, in my opinion, in NFL history, and a lot of people may disagree with me on this, and that's cool,
right.
is Mike Holmgren's when he was in Green Bay. He had
Right.
on that
Well,
staff Andy Reid,
yeah.
Steve Mariucci, John Gruden. All those
Hard to argue
guys
that.
went off and became very successful head coaches. Mariucci had a great success in San
Mm-hmm,
Francisco.
mm-hmm.
Andy Reid is still coaching to this day.
Yeah. Enough
And
said
John
there.
Gruden went off and had success with the Raiders at the beginning and with Tampa Bay. So, and then you look who has been spawned off of those trees. McVay is spawned off, everyone says off the Shanahan tree. He initially learned coaching from John Gruden.
True.
So that's where you kind of have to look at it and go, like, Mike Holmgren had a great deal of influence over the National Football League for the last 20 years in offense, like Bill
Right.
Walsh did back in the 80s, coming through with the Niners and what they did. So that's why, like, ultimately, it's going to be really interesting to see how long. And the one thing John Schneider did say in his press conference about the, coaching search and whatnot, one, I love it. They've spread a wide net. Like, they have thrown a massive net out, which is great. They didn't just go, okay, Dan Quinn's
Quinn's
the
our
guy.
Yeah.
But the other thing is he mentioned how someone asked him, I believe it was, and I can't remember the direct question, but it was essentially, hey, have you talked to the players since Pete's dismissal, or did you talk to them about it? And he goes, I haven't yet. I don't have time to yet. We're competing to get our coach, which
Right.
to me tells me you're going after the top,
For
which
sure.
follows the Allen kind of protocol. When they got Mike Holmgren, the only weird gap in there was Jim Mora. But outside of that, it's been, we're going to go get the guy. And so I think it's going to end up being either Bobby Slowick or Ben Johnson. And the big thing everyone's saying is Ben Johnson's tied to the Commanders because of their new head or GM that they just hired there away from the San Francisco 49ers. But like even Chris said, why would you go to Washington?
Right.
Where they don't have the weapons. They're under new ownership, yes, which
Don't have the culture.
They don't have a culture yet. And you are going to have to do so much more. And I get some guys may say, hey, that's the challenge I'm looking for. But look how many guys have taken on those sort of challenges as hot coordinators. Look at what Arthur Smith did with Atlanta, right? He comes out of Tennessee. He has a great run in Tennessee where they're one of the top offenses. I'm going to go fix Atlanta. He's out of a job now.
He's out of a job.
You look at some of the guys that have gone and done those kind of things and you kind of go, oh shit, like, was that really the right move, or should I gone somewhere that is established? Like if Ben Johnson comes, he's got weapons. He's got almost the exact same amount, if not more weapons than what he had in Detroit. He's got an established GM
Yeah.
that's not going through his first draft. That's not going through any of that stuff. Like that's the other key factor in this, I think, that people have to understand is how many of these jobs that are open are you getting a GM and coach tandem
Yep.
where
Yep.
they're hiring a GM to go with
Working
the
together a
coach
little bit.
rather than, hey, John Schneider's been in the league doing it for however many years now, 14 years. He's regarded as one of the top GMs. You get to come in and you get your input, but you don't have to make all the crunching decisions and do your first draft with the guy that's doing his first draft. Like
Right.
you both kind of get to do it. You know, he gets to come in and learn and not have to do it. I think that to me, if I was a coach, that'd be a huge selling factor. Plus, the Pacific Northwest is a great place to live when we're not having the crazy snowfall that we're having right now and everything
Yeah.
gets shut down. But
Yeah.
yeah,
No. That you make great points. Like, it's just this you want to play here. You want to coach here. Like, why would you not? I mean, it's got the history. Look at even on the player side of things, guys that want to come back, guys that have like got into it with coaches and GMs and still come back because we love Seattle. We love the culture here and all this kind of stuff. Now we talk about how the culture shifted a little bit, all this kind of stuff, but whatever. I mean, you're talking about a foundation that's been built. The Allen family still runs this team that is so it's in good hands from the top down. So if you're a new coach, like you said, you're working with a veteran GM who knows what he's doing, who hits on drafts. This is where you want to come. So I don't see why they're going to have a tough time getting their guy. I don't. I think I don't know who they're going to take, but I think if John's got his one or two, number one and number two, I believe he'll get one of those guys. Because like you said, where else are you gonna go? What's gonna give you all this? Like you're not walking into a 3-win team with a bunch of scrubs. This team, if you're Ben Johnson, you could say, man, if I come in here with this roster and we shore up some interior line, maybe the D line with a piece or two, and Nwosu's coming back, all this kind of stuff. Man, I could go head to head with San Francisco next year. Like,
Mhm.
if I'm so why would I not want to come to that situation? Like, that's just to me, it's a no-brainer. Like, name me one thing that is not good about coming into this situation. Like, because that's
There's
a
one
way
thing.
shorter list.
There's one thing, and the only thing that is going to be
Right.
you are following a living legend. That is
Yeah,
that is the only thing for
the
a
only thing. Okay.
and like you look at when we went from Mike Holmgren at the time, living legend, to Pete Carroll. Yes, we had the gap year. I don't even count that. To Pete Carroll, essentially.
Right.
Pete wasn't a rookie head coach. Pete had
No,
been a head coach. He had run his
been a
shit in
coach for years.
college.
Yeah.
He had experience. He didn't have that. Where at Ben Johnson, my first gig is I'm following Pete Carroll. Like I'm following Mr. Bubblegum run up and down the sidelines, packed energy. Like that's the only thing. But this is where I say, like, that's the only thing. And again, this is where it's the only thing, but I have John Schneider.
Yeah.
John
And
Schneider is the biggest kind of nullifier of that thing because it's John Schneider still being here. It's not crap. Me and so are now going to be taking over John Schneider's role and Pete Carroll's role,
yeah. Yeah.
trying to get this organization. Like that's a bigger step than, hey, this is,
Slide
John
in with
Schneider
me.
working with me on me now stepping into the shoes of Pete Carroll, which are not small shoes to fill. The thing that worries me is when I see these ex Seahawk players, Sherman, KJ Wright, voicing their opinions on how it needs to be Dan Quinn.
Yeah.
That bothers me because that tells me that you're a little too blinded by your situation of, yes, I love Pete for what he did and he
The
was
good
my
old days.
coach and all that. It's a little bit like, hey, we need to move forward. And if this guy does struggle in year one or year two and
You
we
don't
go
have to keep him around, man. Right? I mean, look at Phillies even talking about getting rid of
Mhm.
Sirianni. The guy
Yep.
went to the Super Bowl last year because you don't want to waste time. And if he's a new head coach and it's not working out, you can get rid of him. So I think, yeah, I agree with you with some of the guys. It's like the game has moved on. Let's move on. Legion of
Mhm.
Boom's moved on. That's why like Dan Quinn just wouldn't excite me. And like you said, you brought up the point. Like, if you're gonna go with Dan, you might as well stick with Pete at least till his contract runs out, or unless he wanted to retire, right? So that I agree. And you know what? To me now, I'd be surprised now if they actually hired Dan. You know
I
what I
don't
mean?
think I don't think
That's
Dan.
what I mean. I think I'd be surprised if that was the announcement. Like we hired Dan Quinn. I think he's down on that list. I think John knows the NFL is different now, and I think that's why he made this move because he knows. Listen, this is not how the NFL. We have to change and pivot and go in a different direction, philosophy wise. And if he thinks Dan's coming from sort of that same sort of mindset that Pete had and defensive coach and all that kind of stuff, and he's not an idiot, right? Dan, John knows what he's doing. So I
This
think
is big for John too. Remember, if John
he's
doesn't
got to
hit,
hit it.
if
He's
he
got to hit
doesn't
it.
hit this, then he's gone in 3 years.
And what do you do if you bring Dan in? To me, if you brought Dan in, he'd almost have a little longer leash in a way. Like if you
Okay,
hired
so
Dan
here's
Quinn and you know what I mean? Like
well,
you
I
just
agree. And here's my problem with the Dan Quinn thing. They played the 49ers this year, right? They played the
right.
49ers in week 5.
Yeah.
42-10 for the 49ers. You can't bring that in. You cannot.
Oh, and don't forget about the Green Bay Packers
The
last
Green
week.
Bay Packer game, like they struggled with motion all year this
Yeah,
year.
so
Basic motion, the Dallas Cowboy defense couldn't handle. And don't get me wrong, I think Dan Quinn, ideally, if I was Dan Quinn, you know what job I'd want? Tennessee. Let me go to Tennessee. Let me go to the AFC South. Let me go down there where I'm, not going to have to run into Kyle Shanahan and McVay 4 times between the two of them in a season and have it where if I don't win at least one of those games and split, I may or may not make the playoffs.
exactly.
But I got one last little tidbit of kind of a rumor that's kind of kicking around for our Seahawks fans out there. There is talk, and apparently it got dropped on Reddit, that there's a chance the Seahawks are switching their jerseys this upcoming season, and it's going to get announced at the NFL draft or the week going into the draft that the Seahawks will have a new look. From what I've read, and I think I sent it to you, Armac, but it sounds like they're going to kind of go to a mix of their modern look and modern logo with the old school throwback.
Okay,
So they're going to kind of have the old school look to their thing with the feather still going down the pant leg and on
then
the
bring back the
collar.
whites too.
And they're going to bring back the throwback white, and they're going to have the throwback blue and throwback white. They're going to get rid of the action green.
Good.
But their home concept will be what they're calling King Blue, which will be a mix between the Royal and the Seahawk Blue we've seen for the last couple of years. The biggest change, though, they were going to be going back to their silver helmet.
Wow.
With the new logo. So there's a
okay.
mock-up that's kind of been done that got released. People can kind of go find it. I'll post it on my social media and stuff. But it's kind of an interesting thing because that truly, to me, I think would be the right thing to do as much as people love their jerseys. I think it's time because that fully closes that chapter of Seahawk football with Pete Carroll because Pete was here when the jersey switch happened. He was a component of the jersey switch with Nike happening. Now you've moved on from Pete, close that chapter, move on completely into a new era.
Yeah, that you bring up a good point, man. Yeah, that's timing's perfect. So I can't wait for those jerseys, man. I'm gonna check out the mock-ups a little later on, but I love the idea because I love the throwbacks, and you get a little bit of mix for your regular every week jersey, man. I'm totally fine with that. So yeah, let's go with that. But hey, man, another like awesome episode. Chris, like can't say enough, man. Bring him on the show and just his insights, awesome, man. So like, thanks again to Chris Cluff for coming on, guys. Make sure you follow him on Twitter. Check out his blog, Seahawk Talk. Like super good source to follow the Hawks and get insights. And hey, man, go check out those books he wrote because I'm telling you, man, like I got mine on order, and I'm not even making that up. I got mine on order right now. So
they're both good books.
yeah, so like and then you want to learn about Seahawks and history of Seahawks and all that kind of stuff, and especially the Zorn one where he's right there, like he is there, and you're getting all the inside stuff of during that era. So yeah, can't say enough. Chris back again, and hopefully I'm sure we'll have him on again on another episode, and just keep talking Hawks with the man. It's fun stuff. So yeah, we'll get out of here tonight. Guys, make sure you look out for us, and please drop a like, subscribe to the YouTube channel Hawk Zone Rundown on YouTube. Hit us up, follow us on Instagram. Just all the good stuff, man. Just because we're pumping out the content, we want to keep it going, we love what we're doing, so just kind of yeah, man, help us out. And yeah, and we'll see you guys in the next one.
Sounds good. See you guys in the next one. Go
All
Hawks.
right. Go Hawks later.